IBO World Champion, La Bella Bestia, coming to you to show my appreciation for the ring IQ. So if you haven't already,
get guard, but
wow,
Howard,
look at the strength.
follow and subscribe Ring IQ and check out the relay where they cover today's top boxing news.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, this past weekend, France's own unbeaten prospect turned contender, Mekhaled, was in action for the first time in close to 2 years. Before this past weekend, the last time Mekhaled saw any action was in December of 2019. She was quite literally coming up on close to 2 years of inactivity, but she snapped that back this weekend.
This
Pacman, who ahead of this fight sported a professional record of 15 wins, 7 losses.
5 knockouts.
Has been knocked out 2 times. 3 now. With a well-placed right hand off a furious salvo that saw Pasa get sat on her back pocket. Pasa, who is coming off a loss, right off a loss to unbeaten Rima Ayadi. Suffered a loss by way of technical knockout. The 5th round of that fight. She got stopped in the 1st round of this one. And I do think that had its role to play in all of this, that Pasa was coming off a knockout loss, because LM isn't a characteristically big puncher. She doesn't normally go in there, score knockouts. She's advanced to a professional record of 15 wins, no losses, and no draws, but as far as knockouts go,
This was only her 3rd.
in 15 professional contests, 15 professional fights, LM's not a characteristically big puncher or a knockout puncher, but she managed to get one this weekend, and I think that Pasa, having been stopped in her last fight, might have something to do with that. That, and LM wanted to go out there, make a statement. She's been eager to get back in the ring after close to 2 years of inactivity.
Campaigns in the super featherweight division.
15-0, that's a hefty number of fights. And now that Mekhaled has snapped back that stint of inactivity, I'd like to see her in there with better fighters under better circumstances than a Pasa Malajic. This division is far too deep.
I mean, I understand to keep busy fighting.
I have no criticisms or critiques with LM having fought Pasa Malajic. I'm saying that moving
I
forward,
think it's time to step it up.
I wouldn't mind seeing Mekhaled take on a Katharina Sanders, a Alicia Baumgartner, Delphine Persoon, maybe. Maybe that's a bit too much too soon.
Yeah, that one is.
Perusa Sharapova, Sofia Ochagava, Argentinia's own unbeaten Karen Carabajal. There are ample names to go around at 130 pounds.
All the champions are busy.
Early November, the day before the big Terence Crawford versus Sean Portier showdown, Michaela Mayer is going to be taking on France's own
Hamadouche.
IBF champion Maiva Hamadouche, Mekhaled's countrywoman of Le France, Maiva Hamadouche. That's in November. Terry Harpier, she's also looking to come back in November, perhaps in a unification match against Hyun Mi Choi, who is also in action this past weekend, with all the belt holders all tied up with each other.
I think LM should try to squeeze a fight in before this year is out.
Because she could use the rounds, you gotta remember. Ahead of this weekend, she was coming up on close to 2 years of inactivity, and in close to 2 years, she's only fought 4.
She's only fought for a round.
She could use the work. She's in a very deep divisions where it's not just the champions. Some of the challengers are just as dangerous, and you might find yourself so confronted with one of them. I think Mekhaled should see about having another fight before 2021 is over, so that in 2022, she's ready to fight for a title. And in other super featherweight news, it's official. Michaela Mayer and Maiva Hamadouche,
They're going to be fighting on November 5th.
the day before big Terence Crawford versus Sean Portier pay-per-view. That's Friday, Sean Portier versus Terence Crawford. That's Saturday on the 6th.
It'll be available on ESPN Plus.
A genuinely intriguing fight. A classic matchup. The boxer versus the puncher. Michaela Mayer being the boxer. Maiva Hamadouche being the puncher. Maiva having more professional experience than Michaela by a wide margin. Used to be that Mekhaled came from a much deeper amateur background than Maiva Hamadouche, up until recently when Maiva tried her hand at amateurs as well, attempting to fight in the Olympic Games. That didn't work out, but Maiva,
She came close.
about as close as Michaela, but as close as she did. If you've been following this channel, you'll know we've talked about this fight a number of times, how it might break down, And Mechalet is a well-schooled boxer, educated, though the pressure from a pressure fighter like a Hamadouche, it can cause a finesse fighting kind of fighter to start coming apart at the seams. They'll lose their form. They'll get exhausted. I mean, it's a tough ask to take on someone like Hamadouche, regardless of what your base style is. But for a fighter like Mekhaled, who's not necessarily the most heavy-handed puncher, is more finesse than ferocity.
How's she gonna deal with Maiva?
I've often said this. Don't assume because Maiva's not the least bit subtle, because Maiva's base style is a bit easier to understand. Don't assume that that makes her easy to deal with. I don't think that Mekhaled Mayer packs firepower to get Maiva's respect. She's going to have to win this fight some other way. Winning a points decision.
It's tough.
Distance. It's a tough ask because that whole fight, Maiva's going to be coming after you. And maybe what Mekhaled can do is win this fight on her feet. Not necessarily by playing keep away all night, giving up real estate, but with pivots and shifts.
Not necessarily keeping Maiva out of the pocket.
Trying to outpoint her from the outside, rather changing your angle of attack, getting to the side of her, turning her.
Fighting the fight on her feet.
And with them, Bull and Matador, all that jazz. I imagine that the pace of this fight is going to be exhausting for Mekhaled Mayer because I feel that Maiva can push Mekhaled in a way that she hasn't really been pushed yet as a professional.
For Mekhaled, this is the moment of truth.
But for Maiva, she's not in unfamiliar territory. Traveling to a foreign land to take on a formidable fighter, yeah, she's done that before. She did that with Delphine Persoon. She traveled to Belgium for that fight.
She is traveling to Vegas for this one.
At minimum, Mekhaled Mayer will have home field advantage. But the edge in power has to go to Maiva. The edge in volume also has to go to Maiva. And the edge in durability and experience.
To say that this will be Mekhaled's toughest test is an understatement.
But you've got to give the girl credit because for a long time, a lot of us wondered if this fight would ever even materialize. Would we ever be here? And here we are. On November 5th, we're going to get the answers we're looking for. We're going to find out if Mekhaled Mayer really is the real deal.
Does she compete at this level or not?
In other news, a bit of misinformation has been floating around in reference to the fighting senator, what could soon be the fighting president, Mr. Manny Pacquiao. Michael Benson tweeted, Manny Pacquiao has confirmed that he's retired from boxing at the age of 42 years old following his defeat to Yordenis Ugas. He leaves the sport as an 8-weight world champion across 4 different decades, one of the greatest boxers of all time. Adequately put by Michael Benson, at least one of the greatest boxers of all time. But as far as Manny Pacquiao being retired, that's not the case.
He's not retired.
Per a tweet from Yahoo Sports' Kevin Ioli, I just spoke with MP Promotions President, Knucklehead Sean Gibbons, on Manny Pacquiao's alleged retirement. The senator is a presidential candidate and has made no decision on boxing career yet. He will in the next few weeks. He will make a final decision whether or not to have one more or retire. Gibbons said when Pacquiao does make a decision whether to have one more fight or whether to retire, the announcement will come through official channels from the senator himself. So in other words, Manny's not retired, and you know that I think he should be. Any of you that follow this channel will know that I've been saying this for quite some time. I think that Manny should call it a career. I think the ideal time to have done so would have been last year throughout the pandemic when he was still coming off of that big win over the then unbeaten Keith Thurman. I think that would have been the fairy tale swan song for the storied career of Manny Pacquiao, the fighter, the senator, the legend.
He's coming off a loss now.
42 years old, coming off a loss. He's a presidential candidate in his own country, and he's wondering if he should squeeze in one more before he calls it a career.
We've known Manny was going to run for president for a while.
President of the Philippines. We've actually known Manny was going to do that for a while. That's not new news. I guess what chaps my ass about all of this is Manny had the opportunity to end his career on a high the way that Bernard Hopkins and Miguel Cotto didn't. You know, those are guys who stuck around for one fight too long. You know, Bernard Hopkins, he was out for 2 years. He decides he wants to have one more fight before officially calling it a career. He goes in there with Joe Smith Jr. He gets knocked out of the ring. Miguel Cotto, right before he retired, he managed to become the WBO's junior middleweight champion in the Kamagai fight. He decides he wants to defend the title for his swan song against Saddam Ali. He pulls a muscle. He loses the title. He loses the fight and retires off that loss. Manny could have ended his career in a way that they did not.
Could have retired a champion.
Last year, the WBA didn't strip him of the WBA title, thereby elevating Yordenis Ugas to full champion till earlier this year.
He should have retired in 2020.
That would have been ideal. Manny Pacquiao's going to do whatever Manny Pacquiao's going to do. If he wants to have one more fight, he's going to have one more fight. If he doesn't, then he doesn't.
But I would have liked to have seen him retire already.
And for more reasons than just one. Because he could have retired on a high note, and because these young guys, this generation of young fighters, have been clout chasing off the name of Manny Pacquiao for years, putting off fights with their own contemporaries to chase him around, hoping they'll win the sweepstakes.
Hoping to make a name off him.
While he's old, inactive, and out of his prime. I mean, earlier this year, it was revealed that Yordenis Ugas and Errol Spence Jr. actually agreed to terms for a unification match, and
Errol put it off.
his focus shifted. He changed gears. As soon as Manny Pacquiao became available, he decided to put that unification match with one of his contemporaries on hold to fight the fated legend. And it feels like that's what a lot of these guys have been doing, Errol Spence Jr. among them, putting off fights with their contemporaries in order to face Manny Pacquiao. We know that the Terrence Crawford fight was never that much of a priority to Errol, but apparently the Ugas fight wasn't either. That's not just one unification match he put off. That's two, so that he can chase around a 42-year-old Manny Pacquiao.
And he's not alone.
Earlier this year, when the people over there at Paradigm, out of Utah, tried to sue Manny Pacquiao for what was supposed to be a breach of contract, it was revealed that Manny had entered into negotiations to fight Mikey Garcia. Mikey Garcia, who hasn't fought since February of last year. Mikey's been sitting out this whole time, waiting for a deal to be ironed out with Manny Pacquiao. He's got no shortage of his contemporaries that he could have fought.
He decided to wait for Manny instead.
And for one reason or another, the fight that materialized, Mikey Garcia is yet another fighter who's put off fighting his contemporaries to chase around the fated legend. And as long as a guy like Manny Pacquiao is still active and still floating around, you're gonna see more of this. These young guys that should be fighting each other, making a decision to chase around an old man instead.
I mean, that's why I wanted him to retire.
It's not just him ending his fabled career on a high, but it's also not giving these young guys the opportunities to use him as a crutch to not fight in other fights. Not giving these young guys the opportunity to clout chase off his name anymore, because that's what they've been doing.
I don't know, maybe he does something domestic.
Yeah, something small, something local, non-title fight, just to get himself back in the winner's bracket before he decides to call it a career.
Maybe that'll be his last fight.
In any event, I maintain my original assertions, my original position. I would have liked to have seen Manny Pacquiao retire a while ago, at least after the Thurman fight. I think that's when retiring would have made the most sense for Manny Pacquiao, when he tried to do other things with other people and those things didn't work out, but he was still a champion. He was still in the winner's bracket. I think that's when he should have retired.
But he didn't.
I mean, who really knows? Things have been very topsy-turvy in the career of Manny Pacquiao as of late, but hopefully he decides to call it a career sooner than later. And finally, Mikey Garcia, who we just talked about. He says DAZN didn't have the budget to stage Regis Prograis' fight. Garcia was intent on fighting former 140-pound champion Regis Prograis, but the bout ultimately was left on the negotiation table due to monetary constraints. We were originally trying to fight Regis Prograis. The timing and schedules of DAZN and Matchroom didn't quite fit the budgets that were required and the dates and stuff, Garcia told Fight Hype. Eddie Hearn said DAZN didn't have the budget for that type of fight with Prograis. That would require a different promotion, more time to promote, and more time to build up the fight. They didn't have the time to do that, so the name that he brought up was Sandor Martin. It should be a good fight. It also allows me to come back and get in the rhythm. I haven't fought in a year and a half now. It's a good fight. If we get through this very well, I'm sure the next one will be a much better fight and much more important fight as well, said Garcia. It can be a fight with Regis or possibly a title fight or something like that. This is a good fight for my return. Prograis was upset that the fight fell apart. It is what it is, Prograis told BoxingScene.com in an interview with Keith Idek. Listen, Mikey, he has a name, and I guess that's what he's gonna do. But I would definitely like to know what the numbers are looking like for him to fight somebody like that. Sometimes, I'm not gonna lie, it just seems like it's not fair. I had a bunch of hard fights coming up, and then somebody like that could just fight a person nobody's ever heard of. I mean, of course, I don't know the numbers, but I'm pretty sure Mikey's gonna get paid something good just to fight anybody. To me, it's not fair, but hey, what can you do about it? That's why I'm out here chilling in Colombia now. I'll be back when they update me with something. It's very frustrating. Very with a capital V. When they told me I had this fight scheduled, I just wanted to win so bad. The whole Josh Taylor thing to me, I'm not gonna lie, I never thought I could lose. Of course, I know everybody is beatable and stuff like that. Nobody's invincible. But for me, I train so much and I have so much passion for the sport to where I never thought I can lose. So when they told me I could fight Mikey, I'm like, man, I don't need a date. I'm gonna train. I'm gonna do what I've gotta do, like every day. I was training because I wanna get better. With those numbers, he probably won't fight me, to be honest. Listen, if he made $7 million to fight Jesse Vargas, he's definitely not gonna fight me for $3 million, $2 million, $2.5 million. If it's still that number by the time we could fight again, yeah, I don't think it's gonna happen. And I definitely don't think Mikey's scared or nothing like that. I would never say that because Mikey's a real fighter.
I mean, the logic is sound, isn't it?
Mikey Garcia did, in fact, make about $7 million to fight Jesse Vargas, and a Jesse Vargas fight is nowhere near as risky as a Regis Prograis fight, even though that Jesse Vargas fight was pre-pandemic, before everything got shut down. That's not going to change how Mikey feels about things, and that's not going to change his demands. There are fighters out there who have been less than understanding of how the pandemic has affected the market and the overall value of a fight.
It's a vicious cycle.
DAZN frittered away that $7 million on Garcia versus Vargas because they were courting Mikey Garcia. They didn't actually have him tied down to a multi-fight deal, but the feeling was that that would lead to a Manny Pacquiao fight.
And it didn't.
And now, based on that $7 million, which you paid Mikey for a fight like that, what do you think he's going to want for a riskier fight? A riskier endeavor with a riskier fighter. Bigger puncher.
It's exactly the way Regis says it is.
Mikey Garcia will tell you that DAZN didn't have it in the budget, but he's not finishing that sentence. They didn't have it in the budget to pay you what you want for that fight.
What do you want for that fight?
What, they gave you 7 for Jesse, so you think they've got to give you 10 for Regis? What are we actually talking about here?
That's what Caleb Plant's getting up front to fight Canelo.
I don't know what kind of money Mikey wants for the Prograis fight. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 7, maybe it's less, maybe it's 5. But it's more than DAZN is willing to pay him at this time, and he's an inactive fighter.
What are you supposed to pay an inactive fighter?
Likely whatever they're paying him to fight Sandor Martin. At minimum, what I want to see is a keep busy fight for Regis. I mean, if you're going to pour money down the drain on a keep busy fight for Mikey, then you should be doing the same for Regis in order to build that fight.
If you are building that fight.
Mikey said the Prograis fight might happen. It might not. Might fight in a title fight instead. I don't think he's going to fight Terrence Crawford at 147 pounds for his title. He's not interested in doing any business with Top Rank. And, you know, Josh Taylor, he's still got all the belts at 140 pounds. So, I mean,
he's a Top Rank fighter, too.
Sounds like he's waiting for one of those belts to go vacant.
And maybe he'll fight Regis for one of those.